When my old friend Jamie asked me to advise his healthcare startup, I expected spreadsheets, coffee, and polite catch-ups. I didn't expect late-night laughter turning into quiet truth, a pitch deck becoming a lifeline, and the twist that would tie together my father's memory, Boston, and love. All at once. Subscribe, breathe with me, and stay to hear how a simple favor became healing, purpose, and an unexpected, tender love. My name is Daniel Hart, and I've practiced internal medicine in Boston for nearly 2 decades. I am the kind of doctor who keeps extra tissues in my pocket, a spare pen behind my ear, and a small notebook of things my patients say that make the day feel brighter. My clinic sits between a barber shop and a bakery in Dorchester. The smell of fresh bread mingles with antiseptic in the hall, and somehow it softens the edges of long days. I share that only so you know the shape of my life. Steady, practical, caring, and quietly full of people and stories. Before the startup, before the twist, my days were exam rooms, blood pressure cuffs, and listening. Always listening. When the text came from Jamie Parker, college friend from Ohio, now very much a Boston person, I was finishing clinic notes and sipping coffee gone cold. "Hey, Doc Hart, need your brain. Coffee? Startup?" It was the kind of message you get from a friend who knows you are busy, who remembers your attention is a gift, and who still carries the self-effacing humor you loved him for back when your hairlines were less honest. I smiled at my phone and felt a little spark I didn't name. I wrote back, "Tomorrow after clinic? Flour Bakery 3. And he replied with a thumbs up and a heart. I told myself the heart was for the scones. We had known each other since freshman year at Kent State, before life sent us east with different dreams. He had been the kid who read every page of the student paper and still saved room for poems. Graphic design, then product design, then a career helping other people explain new things to busy minds. I was the kid who poured coffee for the dorm all-nighter, and then walked a friend to the counseling center at dawn. We were both quietly gay. We knew. We saw. We nodded in the subtle ways you do when you are young and worried and trying to pass all your classes and also your own heart's test. We never dated. We never even named it out loud. We loved each other like healthy brothers lean on one another, with a loyalty that outlasted geography. At Flower, he stood when he saw me. He has always been shorter than me by a few inches, but somehow, when he smiles, he feels like the tallest person in the room. He hugged me, and his jacket smelled like cedar. It was early spring, the pale kind of Boston spring that promises warmth and then tests your faith with a wind off the harbor. We sat. He fumbled with napkins in that way he does when he is excited and a little nervous. "You look good." "Doc," he said. "Sleep is a real miracle worker," I replied, smiling. "You're lying," he said, and we both laughed because it was true. Doctors are not famous for rest. We ordered coffee and a lemon tart to split. Then he told me about the startup. It wasn't crypto or a delivery drone or a dating app that matched you with someone who liked your favorite bread. He called it Wayfind. He described it in clean sentences that honored my attention. A simple platform for caregivers to organize errands and rides and companionship for older adults, especially those who felt left out by the tangle of healthcare portals and social isolation. Volunteers could set availability. Families could coordinate. Clinics could refer. Jammed calendars could unjam. It would be accessible. It would be kind. It would remind you that your neighbor, the one you nod to, might need a ride to the pharmacy more than a cheerful wave. "I know it sounds simple," he said, "but so much of help fails because the pipes connecting people are rusty or missing. I want to be the pipe, not the fancy faucet. The pipe." "It sounds beautiful," I said, and I meant it. "It sounds like what we should have had last year when half my seniors canceled their appointments because their rides broke down or their nephew's schedule changed." His eyes softened. "I thought of you," he said, "and of your parents, and of mine." We were quiet a moment. My father had died 9 years earlier, after a slow slide into a life he no longer recognized because of Alzheimer's. My mother had moved to a smaller apartment and learned, late in life, how to accept casseroles from people she had once only waved to. Jamie knew the broad strokes. He knew because when my father died, he had flown in for the service and stayed in the back of the church, hands folded, eyes wet, every inch of him an offering of support. He never pushed me to talk. He waited and he stayed. "I need an advisor," he said. "Someone who actually understands how clinics and families operate. Someone who knows what human kindness looks like in a waiting room when the air smells like disinfectant and fear. And, selfishly, I need a friend who can tell me when I am wrong." "I can do that," I said. The words came out easily, and then my chest did something. A small tightness, not pain, but a suggestion. I recognized it. Anticipation. We started small. He came to the clinic on a Wednesday and sat in a chair I had borrowed from my coworker. We kept it low-key and HIPAA safe. He watched the rhythm of my day like a dancer watching a coach's feet. He noticed how Mr. Ramirez always arrived early to sit near the window because the light soothed him. He noticed that Ms. Jackson, widowed, talked about her late husband when her arthritis flared. He noticed that my medical assistant, Tara, put a pen on the counter for every patient so nobody had to ask. He noticed so much, and in the best way. He noticed to help, not to control. We had dinner after my shift at a small place in South End with more plants than seats. He used to be a picky eater in college, but adulthood had taught him that if you sit with someone who cooks with care, you trust their hands. We ate lentils, roasted carrots, and the kind of bread that breaks with a sigh. He asked me gentle questions about the clinic, my routines, how the pandemic had frayed and patched the neighborhood fabric. I asked him where he was working from now, how he was paying rent while building an app, who his investors were, whether he had someone at home who made him remember to sleep. He shrugged at the last question and smiled in a way that made his dimples appear, twins at the corners of his kindness. We fell into a pattern. Twice a week we met after work. He would bring me a draft screen, a flow chart, or a scenario. How would a granddaughter schedule a ride for her grandfather who hates to feel like a burden? I would bring him stories in the grit of real life. He likes radio baseball games. Can your app remember that so whoever drives him knows to turn on AM? He loves the Red Sox. He loosens if you mention the seventh-inning stretch. He would listen, take notes, and tell me to check my email later because he had questions he didn't want me to answer while my brain needed to rest. He bought me tea sometimes instead of coffee and called it sleep insurance. As the weeks passed, my patients began showing up in our conversations as more than examples. They became teachers guiding our hand. We worked on a feature called Gentle Notes, where family members could leave small touch points. She calls her cane Bessie. Please do not mock Bessie. He loves to sing church hymns softly. He is not humming to annoy. It felt like we were making a kind tool for a world that often forgets. Kindness is a skill you practice, not a trait you inherit. One night, after a longer than usual session testing the prototype, our attention softened and we looked at each other. Really looked, the way you do when laughter quiets and the streetlights begin to talk. He held my gaze with a steadiness that felt like a hand on my shoulder. We did not say anything grand. We did not have to. The room had changed. I tell my patients that grief and love are close cousins. They teach you the same lessons in different language. That your body keeps stories even when your head tries to move on. That you need to eat even if you do not want to. That a hand on your back can be the difference between feeling alone and feeling accompanied. In the months after my father died, I had carried my grief to work like a folded letter in my pocket, touching it between rooms, remembering its shape. I had dated a little and then less because I was building a new kind of steady. But sitting with Jamie, watching him take care with people who were not even his yet, I felt a shift I did not name. He made me feel that steady could grow, not just defend. We got into mass challenge with a simple deck and a pilot plan. I told him how rare it was to get into anything in Boston without a letter from someone's neighbor's friend. And he joked that my patient, Ms. Jackson, probably had better connections than both of us. We celebrated with pizza and fresca like two teenagers who had won a science fair. He took a single slice and folded it, neat as a well-made hospital corner. I took two and told him I would take the stairs in the morning. He asked me about stairs with a raised eyebrow. He knew I always take the stairs. Our first pilot partner turned out to be a community center in Hyde Park with a van and a bossy calendar. The director, a woman named Nia, had the energy of an entire marching band and the patience of a librarian. She gave us space in her office to test with a small group of seniors and their adult children. The first session had 6 people, including a retired teachers' union rep named Sal, a former postal worker named Eleanor, and a quiet gentleman named Victor, who wore a Red Sox cap and a jacket even though it was warm outside. They listened to Jamie with the same attentiveness I had seen in my exam room. He spoke slowly, kindly, and with humility. He allowed our testers to tinker and to complain. They told us what they didn't like. They told us what they loved. They told stories and drank weak coffee and made each other laugh. It was, in effect, a good clinic morning with more laptops. Victor looked at the logo and said, "It's a nice name, Wayfind. Been trying to find my way since I left Cuba, and that was before you were born." I watched Jamie look at him with the kind of gaze that says, "Tell me more if you want. And you do not have to if it hurts." Victor talked. We listened. It is not a high-tech method. It is the finest method I know. After the session, we sat on the low wall in front of the community center while the sun considered whether to stay. He asked me how I felt. I told him I felt like an organ donor who discovered that the person who needed the match had been living quietly across the street. I told him I felt like my father would have liked the texture of the afternoon, the simple good of it. He put his hand on the wall near mine. It was an almost touch. He said, "I wish your dad could see this." The way he said it made me turn. "You talk about him like you knew him," I said, not as accusation, more as curiosity. He opened his mouth and then closed it like he was changing gears. "I talk about him like I listened," he said. "Listening then and now. It's my core," I nodded. I didn't press. I am a doctor. I know when a story needs to pause because the heart is doing important internal paperwork. We kept going. We refined. We discovered bugs and sent them to that mystical place where code goes to be scolded and improved. We argued gently about fonts and more seriously about when to prompt volunteers to check in after a visit. He wanted to avoid anything that felt like surveillance. I wanted to make sure people were safe. We found the middle, and in finding it, we found another kind of middle, how to disagree without shrinking the other person. One evening he texted, "You in for a drive north? I have a secret weapon I want you to meet." I told him I had clinic until 4 and then I was his. He picked me up in a reliable hatchback that had seen better times but kept its promises. We drove to southern Maine, to a town with clapboard houses, a main street where the pharmacy still called you by name, and a diner with a neon sign that looked like it had been humming since 1965. We parked in front of a tidy blue house with a ramp instead of stairs. "My grandma," he said softly. "Agnes Parker. She raised my dad and then helped raise me. I told her about you and about Wayfind. I told her you were a doctor who listens." She said she wanted to see with her own eyes. She met us at the door with a hug that startled me, which I took as my fault for forgetting there are people who know exactly how to love a stranger. She wore a sweater the color of bananas and had a cane that tried to look like a walking stick but was not fooling anybody. "You're Daniel," she said, like she had already decided. "The one who doesn't let dignity get lost in the haze. Come in. I made meatloaf because I don't know how not to." Her living room had family pictures and glass birds in the window. She had the softest voice, like a path in the woods. She told us stories about Mr. Parker, who had worked at the mill and had a laugh that scared crows. She told me that when Jamie was little, he organized a neighborhood cleanup with an index card file and a prize for the kid who brought the most bottle caps. She told me that kindness runs in families if you let it. She told me she thought Wayfind was something her friends would actually use without feeling small. After dinner, as she wrapped us leftovers like a general issuing rations, she put her hand on mine and said, "I don't know the details of the young, but I can see the outline of love when it visits. If it's visiting, don't leave it sitting on the porch." The drive back to Boston was quiet in the best way. We listened to a playlist of songs that were older than both of us and not embarrassed about it. The highway hummed and the stars did their best. He kept both hands on the wheel like the careful man he is. Somewhere near the state line, he said, "I have been asking you to help me build a bridge. You know that. There's something I haven't told you about why the bridge matters." I turned to him, but he kept his eyes on the road, which made me trust him more. "You don't owe me anything," I said. "I owe you the truth," he said, and then he drove the rest of the way in a silence that felt like a promise. The next day we had the first public demo. It was in a church hall with bad lighting and the best coffee cake, the kind of space where the smell of old paper programs and floor wax is part of the architecture. Nia from the community center came. Tara from my clinic came. My mother called to say she was praying for everything to go right, and that she hoped I had worn the sweater she liked. I had not, but I told her it was next to my heart anyway. A reporter from a local paper came, the kind of reporter whose questions feel like respect. Jamie stood at the lectern and introduced Wayfind like it was a friend, not a product. He thanked the pilot partners. He thanked the seniors who let us test in their lives. He thanked me in a way that made the room look over at me all at once and made me wish for the safety of a white coat. Then he paused, the way a doctor pauses when there is more to say and the heart needs you to make careful space. There is a story beneath this story, he said. He took a breath. His voice warmed. 9 years ago, I was living in Boston, new to the city, trying to figure out how to be useful. I signed up to volunteer at a memory care unit near Jamaica Plain. Once a week, I sat with residents who did not always remember my name, but who remembered songs, smells, and the way a baseball game on the radio can make a room feel like summer. On my second week, I met a man named Thomas Hart. He used to be a teacher. He loved the Red Sox. He spoke very highly of his son, a doctor who was, in his words, gentle with the truth. He could not always remember that son's name, but he remembered the feeling of pride. He said it felt like warm water over cold hands. My chair did something I have never experienced. It shifted under me with a gravity all its own. I felt my chest open and ache. I was his baseball companion, Jamie continued softly. We listened together. We made a ritual of the 7th inning stretch from 2 chairs that had seen better days. On the nights when the game got boring, he would tell me about the clinic with the barber shop next door and about a doctor who takes the stairs. I did not know then that the doctor was Daniel, my friend from college, because life, as it does, had given us a habit of checking in only at the holidays and sending each other pictures of our nephews instead of our shadows. Mr. Hart taught me that companionship isn't small. It's the whole thing. It's the pipe under the sink that keeps the winter from being too cold. He looked at me then, with that steadiness that can hold a person's weight without strain. When Mr. Hart passed, he said, I promised myself I would build something that honors the time between people who are learning how to say goodbye and the people who love them and don't know how to ask for help. That promise became this idea. I didn't tell Daniel because I was afraid that the story would feel like a debt, or like I was trading on the memory of his father. But it is the truth, and this is a good room for truths. Mr. Hart, wherever you are, we're trying to be useful. This bridge is for you. The hall was very quiet, quiet like snow, quiet like the pause after a heartbeat on a monitor where everyone holds air in their lungs at the same time. Then Nia stood and clapped once, twice, and then the room found the rhythm. It wasn't thunder. It was the sound of people saying yes to a tender thing. I sat there and tried not to cry because I am an adult man with a pocket full of tissues, and I refuse, on principle, to be caught unprepared. But the tears came anyway in the specific way grief does, warm, almost grateful, as if it is relieved to be seen. My mother's words came to mind. We accept casseroles and we accept help. I stood and hugged Jamie at the front of the room, and whatever the room saw on our faces, they knew to let it be. Afterward, outside in the soft light, he said, I should have told you sooner. I took a breath the way I tell my patients to do. In through the nose, hold, out. You told me when your heart could do it without twisting, I said. Thank you for loving him. Thank you for loving me, in your way, even then. He laughed a soft laugh that was almost a sob. We stood with the church's white clapboard behind us and the city in front of us, and it felt like a diagram of a life. The past, solid and familiar. The present, small and bright. The future, messy and somehow inviting. The days that followed were busy. The demo had attracted attention. A local news station did a segment that made our mothers cry and our beta testers feel famous. We set up more pilots. We hired a part-time coordinator named Luis, who had the calm of a lake and the efficiency of a good school nurse. We discovered that many volunteers were middle-aged men with excellent playlists and a secret desire to be of use. We discovered that many seniors just needed someone to visit while they waited for test results. someone to joke with about the Sox bullpen decisions, as if the stakes were lower than scans and labs. The work grew, and so did the space between me and the way I had been living. I still loved my patients and my clinic. I still kept spare pens. But I found myself talking about Wayfind in exam rooms when it fit like a glove, not like a sales pitch. I found myself eating lunch sometimes and telling Tara about which feature she would have designed better. I found myself, if I am honest, thinking about Jamie when I waited for the elevator and taking the stairs not out of discipline but because it let me burn a little of the buzz that his nearness brought. One night, after a long day in which a pilot site ran out of coffee and patience at the same time, he came over to my place with takeout and that face that says, "I can hold this with you." We ate on the couch. He took off his shoes like a person raised right. We talked about nothing and then everything, the way people who trust each other do. At some point, there was a moment when the flow of words met the flow of feeling, and the room itself seemed lit from the inside. He looked at me like a person looks at a horizon they have finally reached. I felt a calm move through me that I had forgotten I could feel. "Okay if I—" he asked, hand hovering. "Okay," I answered. Our first kiss was not fireworks. It was not a movie with swelling strings. It was the kind of kiss you give when you have been practicing respect for a very long time and you finally get to add touch. It was simple. It was steady. It was us. After, we sat with our foreheads touching like children about to tell secrets under a blanket. He said, "I have been in love with you in quiet ways for a long time." I said, "I have loved you in careful ways for a long time, too." There was relief in the room that felt like the first day after a fever breaks. We did not rush. We did not write a script we could not keep. We kept our lives and we let them braid in the places where it made sense. He kept his apartment where the plants thrive without supervision. I kept mine where the books are shelved like colleagues. We found small rituals: Sunday morning pancakes at a place that calls everyone honey, a shared Google Calendar called Gentle Adventures, walks by the river in rain because rain makes the world honest. All through spring and into summer, Wayfind grew. We released version 1 and then version 1.something, which is what you do when code learns to be better in public. A man named Sal landed in a hospital bed with pneumonia and got 3 visitors because the app matched volunteers who liked to read the sports page aloud. A woman named Ruth, whose daughter lived in California, got a ride to her mammogram and a driver who remembered to ask about her cat. Our gentle notes became more than a feature. It became a way for families to keep a history of care that felt like a family recipe box. The app reminded people of medications and also of birthdays. It was not perfect, but it was deeply good. Then came August, and with it a curve we did not expect. The expansion partner we had hoped for, a large healthcare network with clinics all over Massachusetts, decided to build in-house. It was corporate for, "We like your idea and we believe our brand can take it farther." It gut-punched the team. The meeting ended with me sitting in a glass room that echoed, and Jamie holding the bridge of his nose the way people do when they are trying to keep tears and thoughts in their rightful places. We walked out into bright sun like 2 people leaving a matinee where the film was sadder. Then they planned. "We can survive this," he said. "We will find partners who want us, not just what we made." "We will," I said. And I heard in my voice the tone I use with families in hard moments, honest and warm, the kind that promises to stick around regardless of outcome. We took a weekend to breathe. Breathing is underrated. It is a medical intervention and a spiritual one. We drove to the Cape. We rented a small cottage that smelled like salt and old books. We ate oysters and debated about lemon versus mignonette like it was philosophy. We sat on the beach with our feet in the water and let the Atlantic remind us that everything big looks smaller when the horizon refuses to hurry. He told me that as a kid he had collected smooth stones and made them into arrangements that his grandmother called temporary art. I told him that as a kid, I had lined up my action figures in a neat row and given them annual checkups. On Sunday night, we wrote a letter to the volunteers and families using Wayfind. We told them the truth, that one partner had stepped away, that we were okay, that we were small but sturdy, that they could count on us. We received replies that humbled us. A grandson wrote that Wayfind had made it possible for him to visit his grandmother without spending the entire afternoon fixing logistics. The time they gained, he wrote, felt like a new room in a house he had lived in his whole life. A volunteer wrote that driving Mr. Victor made his week feel like more than deadlines. He wrote, "Thank you for letting me be useful." It was a sentence that could power a city. In September, an email arrived from the city stating that they wanted to pilot Wayfind for a subset of services in partnership with clinics. There would be a small grant and a public presentation. It would not make us rich. It would, however, lift our little boat in the public's view. We prepped slides that were clear and kind. We rehearsed our stories. We reminded each other to drink water. On the day of the presentation, my mother took the bus into town, wore her favorite scarf, and sat in the second row. Nia came, and Luis and Tara, who took the afternoon off and risked the wrath of a temperamental scheduling system. Agnes could not travel, but she FaceTimed us from her kitchen while we stood backstage with nerves that felt almost luxurious after years of more serious fear. We went out to a room of city officials, community leaders, and people whose job titles were strings of words you only understand slowly. Jamie spoke like a person lighting a candle. I spoke like a doctor whose patients had taught him better sentences. We got the pilot. We got a little money and a lot of goodwill. We walked out into late afternoon and high-fived like teenagers. My mother hugged Jamie and called him honey and told him that if he broke my heart, she would make him sit and listen to her 3 favorite hymns on repeat. He promised to do the listening anyway. At dinner that night, at a long table in a place that served meatloaf that made you rethink meatloaf, he handed me a small box. My heart sprinted. He laughed and said, "Don't panic, doctor. It is not that. Not tonight." Inside the box was a key. "To the office," he said. "To our thing. Symbolic and also practical. We change the locks because it's Boston. But also, I want you to never knock at a door that is yours." I have never been proposed to with an office key, and I recommend it. We ate dessert. A caramel something that tasted like all the good words for brown. And then we went back to the office to label cables in a fit of organizational romance. Life, at this point, had the feeling of a snow globe that has been shaken. The flakes were falling. The scene was beautiful. The trick was to remember the globe could be shaken again and to anchor yourself not to the falling, but to the mutual hands holding the glass. I wish I could say the next months were only or mostly triumph. They were not. Agnes fell and broke her wrist. The city's procurement process took longer than any reasonable person hopes. A bug in the app made a van arrive at Auntie May's house at midnight instead of noon, and we were up at 3 in the morning calling and apologizing and delivering pastries the next day with contrition. Through it all, we did what we had promised at the start. We stayed. We showed up. We apologized. We improved. In November, we launched version 2. We had an in-person gathering with cider and paper name tags that were too flimsy and a playlist that slid from Sam Cooke to Whitney Houston to the kind of old country that sounds like an uncle telling a story on the porch. Jamie had a surprise. He is good at surprises, not because he hides things, but because he lets them ripen until they are sweet. He stood and thanked everyone. He told a story about a volunteer who had sat with a woman through her first chemo appointment and had learned how to knit in the waiting room because she loved to knit and forgot she had taught 3 generations already. Then he asked me to join him on the makeshift stage. When we launched Wayfind, he said, we wanted to shine a light on the kind of help that is older than apps. Tonight we are adding something to the light. He tapped a button on the screen behind us. The Wayfind homepage changed. In the corner, a small heart appeared, next to a baseball icon and a note that read, "In memory of Thomas Hart. 7th inning stretch at 7 p.m. every night." It was a little Easter egg. For anyone who clicked it, a recording played of the 7th inning stretch song, sung by a Boston barbershop quartet we had hired. And a pop-up invited users to take a breath, stretch, and text someone they love. The room cheered. Not loudly, but in that way that feels like a hug. I looked at him and thought about all the ways a person can be loved. I thought about my father, who had lost so much but never lost the habit of kindness. I thought about a younger Jamie, sitting in a room with a radio and a man who was losing his words and finding new ways to communicate. I thought about the pipe under the sink and how it keeps the house livable. I loved him. I loved him with the part of me that counts pills and schedules mammograms and tells the truth gently. And I loved him with the part of me that hums in the shower and forgets to water the spider plant. When the party ebbed and the floor was sticky with cider, he took my hand and led me to the back office. "One more surprise," he said. He opened the closet. Inside was a corkboard with a map of the city and small pins where Wayfind had connected people. There was a ring hanging from a ribbon on the board. My heart did that sprint again, the one that I pretend doesn't tire me out. He cleared his throat. "Still not a marriage proposal?" he said, and laughed at my face. "But a promise. This ring is from my grandmother. It is her mother's wedding band. She said if we ever needed a reminder that care is a circle, not a line, we should hang this here." I exhaled. We stood together and looked at the map, at the pattern of tiny lights we had helped make. He put his arm around me. We swayed, as people do when they are the happiest kind of tired. December arrived. Boston put on its annual demonstration of how to be cold and charming at the same time. We took walks where our breath made little clouds and our hands found each other without ceremony. We visited Agnes and brought her a device with enormous buttons that let her use Wayfind to call for companionship to her church's holiday concert. She wept at the concert and said that God must love good design. We drank hot chocolate and pretended we were not adults with responsibilities. On the shortest day of the year, I finished clinic late and texted him that I would swing by the office before heading home. He replied with an emoji of a snowflake and a heart. I arrived to find the conference room dark, a small light in the corner, and a smell that made me pause. Cinnamon and something else I could not place. On the table were 2 plates, 2 mugs, and a piece of paper that said, in his neat handwriting, "Tonight, we go live." My heart learned a new speed. I looked around. On the big monitor at the end of the table, the Wayfind homepage was open. There was a button that said Go Live. It was new. "We're already live," I said softly, to no one, and then to him as he stepped into the doorway with a nervous smile. "We are," he said. "But there is a new release. It needs 2 people to push the button." He stepped closer. He was wearing a sweater I loved on him, navy, soft. He smelled like cedar and cinnamon. He took my hands. "Daniel," he said, and then stopped, because sometimes saying a person's name is an act of worship and your mouth knows not to rush. "I came to Boston to make useful things. I asked you for help and you gave me the rarest gift, your attention. I thought the twist in our story would be this app, and then the other twist was that I had loved your father without you knowing. But the real twist is older and simpler. I did not expect that asking you to help me build a tool would teach me how to build a life. With you. If you are willing, I would like to be your partner. In Wayfind, in mornings, in hard days, in quiet, in 7th-inning stretches and quiet Tuesdays. I would like to be the person who makes sure your plant survives when you travel, and the person who reminds you to eat when you are caring for everyone else. I would like to be your home." He held out his hand. In it was a small ring box. He smiled like a person who has discovered that vulnerability is less terrifying than regret. He opened the box. Inside were 2 simple bands, not flashy, nothing that would make a magpie swoon. They looked like the kind of rings you wear while washing dishes and holding hands. "I promised Agnes I would not do a public display," he said, voice shaking. "But I wanted the memory of this place, because this is where we started to say yes to what matters." I put my hands on his, and I nodded. "Yes," I said, in the tone I use when I tell a patient that the test results are good, in the tone I use when a friend needs to hear it twice. I cried. He cried. We laughed at our crying. We pressed the Go Live button together, and the screen changed to a page I had not seen. It was a simple white screen with black text, and it said, "Daniel and Jamie, will you go live together?" Below were 2 buttons, yes and of course. We clicked. Of course, because we are who we are. We danced in the conference room to a song we both loved, swaying and laughing and stepping on each other's socks. We ate cinnamon rolls he had warmed in the office microwave, which is not a sentence I thought I would treasure, but I do. We put on our rings. We took a picture for Agnes and for my mother and for the tiny part of ourselves that still needed proof. In the weeks that followed, we told people. We told our mothers. We told our friends who were not entirely surprised because, as Agnes had said, love announces itself to people who know how to see outlines. We did not rush to plan a wedding. We let the word fiancé do its work in our mouths. We kept building Wayfind. We kept holding space for seniors who needed a ride and for volunteers who needed to be needed. We kept showing up for each other in the small ways that add up. Bringing soup on a cold night, changing the office water jug without making a show of it, writing a note and hiding it in the pocket of the person who has to speak that day. In the spring, we had a little ceremony in the community center where we had done our first pilot. We asked Nia to officiate because it felt right. My mother read a poem and forgot a line and laughed and made a new line. Agnes walked down the aisle with her cane and her head high and touched our cheeks with her hand like a blessing. Tara stood beside me and held my elbow like I was giving away something precious and receiving something more. The volunteers came and the seniors came, and the map with pins grew a cluster near the center that looked like a heart. Weeks later, at a doctor's appointment, I ran into Mr. Victor. He hugged me and told me that since Wayfind, he had been to the barber every month without a long break and that he felt like himself again. He said he liked how the app remembered he prefers Saturday morning rides because he gets soup afterward and watches a game. He said, "It's a good thing, doctor." You made a good thing, and you got a good man. He tapped the ring on my hand and said, "That too. Sometimes patients teach you about courage. Sometimes they teach you about gratitude. And sometimes they teach you that joy is not an emergency. It does not require you to brace. It asks you to exhale." The twist I did not expect was, in the end, not one twist, but a set of threads that braided into something sturdy. A friend asked me for help with his startup. What he was asking underneath was, "Will you sit with me as I try to do a good thing? Will you teach me the parts I don't know? Will you let me love you?" It was a bigger favor than the text suggested. It was the best favor I have ever said yes to. When I sit at my desk now, writing notes and checking labs, I sometimes look up at the clock and imagine my father somewhere with a radio, the seventh inning arriving like a ritual, the song beginning. I imagine Jamie there, younger, learning how time can widen when someone sits with you. I imagine my patients in their homes, a volunteer arriving because an app made a path, yes, but also because a promise did. Our promises built the bridge. We just walk it now, together. If you are listening and you are older, I want you to know your life has not slipped out of relevance. You are seen. If you are listening and you are younger, I want you to know, sit with the people you love when the game is slow. Look at them the way you look at a horizon you are grateful to have reached. If you are listening and you are building something, I want you to know, build it like a pipe, not a faucet. Make it carry warmth. And if a friend asks for help and your heart does a small, tight thing that feels like anticipation, answer the text. Meet them for coffee. Split the lemon tart. It might just change your life.